Hey guys, fuck, I didn't even think about one beforehand here. And I feel good. I'm happy today. I just played my guitar and got some shit out. I had a challenging last few days, and I was a little bit depressed. By a little bit, I mean a lot yesterday. But it's okay. Like, I feel like I'm at the place with my kind of affect regulation, if that's the right word. I don't know. That's just a word that kind of came up to describe this kind of state of being able to respond to my emotions when they come up and to not be uber destructive with them. Like when I was in high school, when I would get overwhelmed with my emotions, you know, you would go right into the self-destructive behaviors. And there's a bit of self-destructive behaviors where I'm just kind of useless all day and I feel useless. I feel like, you know, I should be out doing something. I shouldn't just be lying here depressed off my ass. You know, and you get into that kind of loop, and you're looking for something. You're looking to feel better before that can happen, and you kind of can't just respond to it and just put it down for a bit. Because I found later on in the day, after, you know, I cried a bit and got some stuff out, you know, I kind of just made some music. I kind of just stuck with it. I kind of just breathed through when I felt overwhelmed with some stuff. And I feel like I'm at the place with my emotions now where, you know, I can have days which are shitty, which are depressive, and I can kind of respond to it, and it's not the end of the world. And I can come back within a day, usually, and at least have a better day the next day, more or less. And that skill, that ability to have consistency with life, to not need to be the best, to not always need to be great, and to not always be, like, low as fuck and have, like, and fucking suck. Like, this kind of, like, flying high and flying low thing doesn't do it for me. I've just realized how useless that is. Because it's not... It has no balance. It has no kind of stability. You know, you have no resilience when you're like, you can't trust yourself. You know, you don't. You're running on faulty fuel. You know, you don't have a strong kind of foundation. At least I think. I've noticed that pattern within myself, and it's something I really want to work on more. And it always seems like, you know, when you're having a good day, like, oh, I'm indestructible, I'm impenetrable. It's never gonna not be like this, but I've been slowly kind of conditioning that out of myself so that I can have more of a stable middle ground, so I don't need to keep falling in the ditch over and over. Because you know the best way to not fall in the ditch? Well, it's to stay out of the damn ditch. But I'm not here to talk about the ditch. I said some bullshit yesterday. I was talking about importance. I was talking about my importance. I was talking about my value, my inherent worth. And I said some things that I think aren't really what I meant, and I want to do better than, I want to respond to, and I've been thinking about it a little bit, and it's tricky, because when you think about importance, when you think about our own value, our own worth, these are tricky kind of questions, and this whole notion of like affirming ourselves and telling ourselves that we are great, we are worthy, we are loved, we are this and that, it never sat right with me growing up, because I always felt deep down like I wasn't enough, like I was fat, like I was laughable, I was subpar, I needed to be better. And if I did better, if I achieved and I was at the level of some sort of ideal, I would then be worthy of this and that and the other. And it led to a lot of discomfort in my life, a lot of suffering, really, of not being enough, and then having these moments of being enough, but realizing when I felt like things were enough in my life, you know, as I kind of talked about in the last one, it was always sort of fleeting, or it was not even always as objective as I thought, where I thought if I met some sort of goal, I would be happy about myself. But what I realized, sometimes I would just get up in the morning and I would just be happy for no reason, regardless of the sort of objective, I don't know, goal or value which I was trying to fill or was trying to necessitate my well-being around. So I kind of became skeptical about that as I grew up, because I started to question, like, where do my own assertions come from? Do I actually believe this? Do I actually think that if I'm not fat, if my friends like me and this and that, if that matters, if that really determines my happiness, and where is importance coming from? What is important? What is my inherent worth? You know, like, what determines my worth, my value? you know, and we have these various stories we like to tell ourselves, you know, and we have a sort of cultural story, you know. I think that a large amount of our value, our worthiness, our own morals is determined by our environment, is determined by the area around us, the kind of collective mind, the mind space in which we are a part of. But the thing is, while we have this collective, we also have an individual space, because that's how the thing changes. And I don't think the collective mind and the individual mind are separate. I think it's just one mind. And I don't know, that's tricky. It's tricky. Like, how does culture, how do societies, how does our collective sort of sense of what's important really change? Well, I think it's through us suffering, us not being enough, us meeting these sorts of ideals, meeting these values, losing weight, getting a girlfriend, making money, doing whatever the fuck it is that we feel like is important. I don't know, being really nice, being really caring towards others, putting others first, all these different values we've had for so long, and we just assume if we can just meet this sort of ideal, if we can just be this way, then we would be happy, then we would be enough. And there's that kind of need to have that in order to be enough. But I always felt like, where does our inspiration towards that come from? If we aren't enough, then how do we become enough? And if we're not enough already, if, let's say, we're fat, and if because we're fat we're not enough and we're bad and we feel bad because of that, because, I don't know, people make fun of us and we're just objectively worse off because we've determined that by some reason. If I'm feeling that way, then how do I have the energy or the volition or the capacity to do better? Is there a way to do better? And if I kind of find some sort of necessity in the sort of inspiration towards losing weight or making money or doing this and that so that I can be better, so that I can be more worthy, so that I can be more acceptable, and we sort of achieve that goal, we kind of have these things happen. I think it's not that it's not important. It's not that we don't have the values that we have for good reason. I think even if things are social constructions, even if the reason why we dress the way we do, the reason why we say the things we do, the reason why we find the things important that we find important is all determined by this sort of collective authoritative moral body of our collective sort of value ecosystem or something, you know, blah blah, you could I don't think that just exists in a vacuum. I think that's intentional. I think that's where we're at, and I think that thing is obviously always changing, because as we adhere to our best, to the good that we are defining as to what's important, there's always room for something new. Nothing ever stays the same. What's been important, what's been valuable in the past is changing. Relativity and all, yeah? But I think the point is not that nothing is important, that you're not important, that life is somehow not important, that there isn't any value, there isn't any meaning. Because that's what it would seem to imply, because whenever we look for importance, whenever we look for meaning, it's always kind of changing. And even when we think we have it, if I was just good, if I was just nice, if I was just a caring person, what really determines that? What really determines how we actually meet this sort of ideal? And what is it that's behind all of these ideals? What are we looking for in the good? What are we looking for in being valuable, in being enough? I think we're looking for our own survival. And I think, you know, that, as I said, like, the necessity of our survival is changing. Where before we needed to gather shelter and do this and that. And there's like, I like the idea of like the pyramid of needs, that kind of humanistic psychology idea, Maslow, I think. And you know, as we kind of evolve, you know, our needs are kind of built up on top of each other as we get certain ones met. And I think even the top of this pyramid towards love and esteem and caring for one another and having empathy, and I think that's as much of our survival as it is to have shelter, to have food and water and all. And without food and water and without this and that, we're not as interested in empathy and compassion and being nice to one another, because we have to get, because I think there's a hierarchy to it, but I think to climb the hierarchy we have to go through each of these needs. I don't know, I'm kind of losing it a bit, because I feel like this is a tricky one. This is a very tricky one. And this is why I struggled with it yesterday, because it's at the root of so much of my suffering is because I just don't feel like I'm enough a lot of the time. I sit down at the piano and I'm practicing, and my own survival is ticking away in my mind. It's like, you know, if I don't get this right, like I need to be more. Like, I don't feel safe with the fact that I don't feel like I'm performing the way I want, or we have this sort of expectation running in our mind, this sort of clockwork, and we assume that if we could just meet that sort of expectation, that assertion in our minds, we would be happy, you know? But because you see, I'm skeptical of it and I'm not. Because there's something nice about practicing and having and being focused and playing to your best ability. There's something nice about losing weight or receiving your friend's validation, your friend's care, your friend's affirmation, you know, or your society's affirmation, or dressing in a way which looks good. I just think that the assertions and the importance that we set we can get carried away with it, and it can almost be like a carrot on a stick, I think, sometimes, where I can notice when I'm at the piano and I have some perfectionist sort of expectation of myself, which I think is fair, because I think it's good to see the ideal, to see the best that we can do, to see what we want, but we also need to acknowledge our own humanity, our own sense of being where we are. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at yesterday with importance, where I think that we have this sort of ideal, we have this sort of best of ourselves, we have this sort of expectation, this importance, and I think our ideal is constantly what's changing. It's the thing that's evolving, it's the thing that's getting met, and it feels good until it doesn't feel good anymore. You know, we build up this sort of, I like to use the metaphor of a Jenga tower, like an ideological, conceptual Jenga tower of ourselves, which are our assertions, our feelings, our morals, our values, our importance. And when we meet said importance and we feel good, the thing is, the goodness, it doesn't last, because entropy, impermanence is always there, and it's never enough. There's always a new problem. I don't know about you, and I don't know what the problem always is. I can give an example. When I'm at the piano and I have a practice session and I'm focused and I find some sort of flow with the instrument. I've practiced and I've worked on something and I have it developed and I can play the way that I want, and I feel a sense of satisfaction with the instrument. But the thing is, it's never enough, because there's always something new that I want to do. There's always the next thing to learn. So I can either be bummed out that I haven't learned that new thing and that this new thing is hard to do, and I can feel like I'm not enough because I don't have that down for some reason. It just becomes highly irrational sometimes, I think. And I think it becomes perfectionistic, and it can become just not grounded in reality whatsoever, and highly impractical to the sort of necessity of the good as we see it. where if we really wanted to reach that goal, is it practical to be upset with the fact that we aren't there? And what's the easiest way to get to the good? Is it to shoot yourself in the foot along the way and to be somewhere else completely complaining, worrying, and basically farting around in your mind about how things aren't enough? Is that really the way towards this sort of best ideal that we have? But can we help it? Is that just not our human condition? Is it something that we can just turn off? Well, I don't know. These are the sorts of questions that I have. But I think what we can do is we can notice this, and we can care, and we can start to question our own beliefs. We can start to question our mind. We can start to become aware of our thinking, and we can think about our thinking. And maybe you've picked up on that, but I like to think about my thinking. But when you think about your thinking, it's just more thinking, which can be thought about, and which can be thought about, and which can be thought about. So sometimes there's a time and a place for thinking about thinking. And I guess yesterday I felt really bummed out about it. And I feel like sometimes I think too much, and I rely too much on thinking. And sometimes you just need to let go of that and to just be as you are, to just be bad, to just be frustrated, to just be not enough. And I find when we can just accept the fact that we feel bad, we feel like something isn't enough, and instead of like thinking about it and trying to be all reasonable about it, sometimes it doesn't work, I guess. And I think we just add so much extra. We just add so much extra onto this process of being alive sometimes, where we're just so focused on being something other than what we are right now. I don't know if that's clear, but I think there is importance. I just don't think it's an absolute, and I think it's something that's considerably changing and is entirely relative to, well, it's just entirely relative. But what is determining that relativity? Is that not an absolute? Is that not an object? Because even if what's important is always changing, importance itself, is that not something which is? So what does that mean about importance? Does it mean that anything is important? Well, I think it means that everything is important. And this is my whole notion that I think the good includes the bad, and I don't think there's such thing as a bad. And I think what's good is being relatively determined. And I've talked about my weird ass relativism before, and I don't need to get into that. So yesterday I was talking about how I don't think I'm worth shit. And I think that's not helpful, because a lot of my assertions, they're not practical and they're not helpful, you know. And I think that they don't, my own thoughts about myself, they're not really grounded in a kind of practical means towards the ideal that I'm trying to reach. And I hold strong ideals for myself because I feel like I can't not do that. But I think we can have these sort of lofty ideals, and I think we can have reals. I think a real, okay, this is a little, it's kind of, I think probably is a better word for, but the real is the means towards the ideal. It's what are you now? What can you do now? What is realistic? You know, we have the ideal which is in our mind and is out there, and I think we get so caught up on that, like looking a certain way, you know, fitting in this and that, you know. And I think that we become victims of that. We become our own worst enemy towards our greatest ideals, and it causes us so much suffering because there's this comparison process, there's this kind of disassociating from ourselves, and we don't really accept ourselves. We don't really appreciate our own being. We don't really find any sort of importance or any sort of gratitude or appreciation for our direct fucking experience right now, because we're too busy comparing it to how it ought to be. And where does it say? Is there like a rule book in the universe somewhere which says that like you particularly ought to look this way or to be practicing at this level? You're the one determining it, but who determines you? So I think while all of our importances, all of our assertions towards the good are kind of meaningless and they're not really worth shit, because they're constantly in flux and you're determining them, and in their attainment they seem to be fleeting, they seem to change. At least that's my experience, and maybe you can relate with that to some way. I don't know. But that doesn't mean that they're not still there. It doesn't mean that we're not still alive, we're not still having this human experience, and we don't still have things to do. We don't still have values to meet. We don't still have ideals to meet. You know, like, there's an importance, there's a passion, there's a meaning to our life. And I think that we're making it, because how could we not? And I think meaninglessness, things not mattering, things being depressing and all, is just another meaning. You can't get away from meaning. Everything is meaning. And whenever I try and get meaning, because you can't, like, it's a self-defining sort of paradox. Is what is the meaning of meaning? Well, you can't. I don't know. I find meaning really, really tricky, and I struggle with it. But I'm not going to submit to nihilism. No. And when I do that, that's shitty. And when everyone's been on my ass, all of my friends, my therapists, they're like, you're too hard on yourself. And I'm like, no, you know, like, fuck you. No. Like, I want to be like that. And it keeps me safe in some way. It keeps me safe from changing. It keeps me safe from actually being with myself, from actually accepting myself, from actually doing better, from actually meeting these ideals that I'm trying to meet by not bogging myself down and kicking myself down into, well, lame sort of comfort of pretending like I'm not enough, pretending like I can't do better, pretending like I can't practically take responsibility, pretending like that isn't just what's going to happen, and like I can't not slow down, take a breath, and take a step back from this sort of process I have in my mind with me, which needs to make me feel bad and needs to try and assert this sort of and maintain my own bullshit Jenga tower of expectations for myself. I've spoken a lot on this. But yeah, I'm not going to keep doing that. I'm not going to keep... Well, I am going to keep doing it, but because even expecting that I'm not going to do it is another sort of thing which I can turn into like another way to put myself to, oh, you're doing it again, blah, 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 blah. So what's going to happen? I'm going to be shitty to myself, but I'm going to notice that and I'm going to do my best to respond to that, because I have people who care about me in my life, and I trust them and I care about them, and I don't want to let them down because I love them and they love me, and I need to love me so I can love you. Is there a difference? What does that mean? Well, fuck you. You tell me what it means. Okay, bye.